Empire. Are you ready for some football like you've never seen before?
While we were showing that, in games and, in reference in different stories, we were also recording proximity data, so distance between players, not only on different teams, but on the same team as well. We also can automatically record the offensive and defensive formation.
That's John Pollard, head of sports at Zebra Technologies, home to the NFL's next-gen stats, where data is informing the modern fan. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein. This is a personal geek out episode for me as someone who has mainlined the sport of professional football, as a fan, and now as a broadcaster for the last 25 years, including my newest role, which is as the radio play-by-play voice of the Washington football team. Next-Gen Stats is one of the great implementations into the broadcast and obviously behind the scenes when utilized for modern team building. And John Pollard was more than eager to share the backstory and the future activations he and his team are working on. Our guest this week is John Pollard. He's the head of sports with Zebra Technologies, which is the company behind NFL's next-gen stats. And man, did we need statistical help with everything else that was missing from the NFL broadcasts this year. Hey, John, how are you? Nice to have you here.
Hey, Bram, thanks for having me.
I don't know that anything changed on your end, but with no fans in the stadium this year, how unusual COVID-19 was for the 2020 NFL season, did broadcasters teams, did anyone ask you guys for anything different than what you've provided in the past?
Well, the short answer is no. We didn't receive any unique requests based on the conditions that we're all living and working under here in 2020. But at the same time, our partnership with the NFL, of course, Zebra is the official player tracking technology partner of the NFL. The 2020 season was our 7th season in that we're partner with the league in providing the tracking technology that delivers the next-gen stats for fans and media and the teams themselves. But each year the NFL media group goes through the tracking data and comes up with a new set of data and analytics and reports that they publish on their next-gen stats site. So each of that's the new stats and information that we see as fans and media are all really contingent upon what the NFL puts together. But each year they continue to expand the catalog and again bring us closer to the game by using our tracking data to tell a really unique story.
All right, so let's go back to the beginning of it 6-7 years ago. What were you hoping to be able to provide to the NFL?
Initially, the engagement between Zebra and the NFL was to utilize our tracking data to generate information that could bring fans closer to the game. So almost strictly, the initial activity was around media. So broadcasters could have more information to use to describe the game, and also create another set of information that would allow the NFL to reach fans through their various digital media, and then provide a new content stream, not only for their broadcast partners, but for the teams themselves to utilize to reach their fan bases. And so that was the initial work. The early stats that we saw were just strictly the miles per hour speeds. And thinking back 7 years now, miles per hour as an acceptable or relatable metric in football, it just didn't occur. We all tend to go to the 40-yard time or the 3-cone shuttle time that might be recorded in Indianapolis. And then, over the past 7 years, we've seen not only fans, but the teams themselves in terms of the coaches and the personnel evaluators, and of course, media personalities and writers and such be very comfortable in utilizing miles per hour to describe a player's capability.
Yeah, we had two prime examples of it this year. Anytime you show Tyreek Hill, and then what was the rundown by DK Metcalf? We had one of those earlier this year where you got to see how fast he was going to catch up to, I think it was the Cardinals defender, right? Wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
That was, in fact, if we all remember, DK recorded a fantastic 40 time in Indianapolis, and that showed up. And I think when we watch a game, as fans or again in the media, we know, and coaches, of course, know when a player is fast. But now, what our tracking data allows is to put context around that speed. And when you can put miles per hour around two players, you start to really appreciate at a new level the athleticism and explosive capabilities of these players. And you mentioned Tyreek Hill. He's perpetually on top of the fastest ball carriers list on the Next Gen Stats site. Another player who's present, consistently is Raheem Mostert, the running back from the Niners. In fact, Raheem has the two fastest times recorded in the 2020 season. He's recorded a 23.09 miles per hour as the top speed this year recorded in the NFL, and then his second place speed was 22.73 miles an hour. I mentioned Raheem because usually we see in either practice sessions or games where teams are using our technology to evaluate players that it's typically a wide receiver or a cornerback that records the higher speeds. And so to have a running back record the two top highest speeds, not only in 2020, but Raheem also was in the top three last year as well, is pretty incredible.
Yeah. All right. So it started with that metric. What has it evolved to for Next Gen Stats over the last 5-6 years?
Yeah, so in addition to miles per hour as an initial, the initial set of information that we saw, we also saw total distance traveled. So our tags, we have 2 tags on every player on the field, and so we can track not only, of course, the miles per hour and the speed, but we can track how far they travel for each play. So we see a touchdown come out of the maybe from a kickoff, a runner might come out of the end zone and run what we would call a 100-yard touchdown in traditional terms. Now with tracking data, you might find that a player runs anywhere from 110 to perhaps 121 yards to make that touchdown happen. And that just describes how much they're actually traveling on the field to avoid tackles and get into open space to reach the other end zone. And I think that information was, for the first few years, that was the information that got people's interest. But while we were showing that, in games and in reference in different stories, we were also recording proximity data, so distance between players, not only on different teams but on the same team as well. We also can automatically record the offensive and defensive formations. We can automatically record the number of players in the box, and so that data was being collected. It just wasn't necessarily being published for public consumption. And what we've seen, over the years are, as I mentioned initially, the NFL's opened up the catalog of Next Gen Stats that they do share with us as the general public. Yeah. And we're seeing things really unique, advanced analytics. Like one of my favorite ones to talk about is the tight window throws category. And so a tight window throw is when a quarterback completes a pass to a receiver, and there's a defender within a yard or less in proximity to the receiver. And then that really gives you an idea of course, the throwing capabilities and the accuracy that NFL quarterbacks throw the football to. It also, does suggest the capabilities of wide receivers to catch the ball in traffic. And again, here I am using terms that we all, grew up with, right? Yeah. That quarterback can really throw it into a tight window, and that receiver can really, on a contested ball comes down with it more often than not. Those are all, descriptive ways to talk about a play, but now we can put quantifiable information to help us appreciate the capabilities of the players.
So you had mentioned there that the NFL kind of slowly allowed some of this stuff to be put out there. Did they perceive it initially as proprietary and that they didn't want the public to consume it, or did they not think the public would have an interest in it? How did that kind of evolve over time?
Yeah, I think the NFL will be better to answer that question. But from my perspective, and what I can share, I think a couple of things. New technology and new information services are really exciting. For all of us who love the game of football and love sports. But the NFL has to be pragmatic, or any league, and established sport has to be very pragmatic when introducing new technology. So I think the first year is just getting comfortable and understanding the efficacy of the system and technology, how the information comes into the databases and how it can be, consistently and reliably distributed to things like applications on websites. How fast can you get the information to a production truck to help the broadcasters out? So I think it's just getting comfortable with the data collection and its availability. I think you mentioned, another key thing there is just, how much of that is is too much. How much of that are the clubs, the coaches, and the players comfortable being shared? How much is considered potentially, a challenge to competitive? How much is too disclosing? And I think, again, the league socializing it with the clubs, and again, being very pragmatic and disciplined about how they describe it and let it go. Now we've got people much more comfortable in both at the team level and the league level with sharing more information. But one thing I'll point out, not only do we have tags on the players, we have an RFID tag inside the football itself. And we have miniaturized an RFID tag that weighs less than 4 grams. And I mentioned that 4 grams because an NFL football weighs about 400 grams. The tag itself weighs less than 1% of the total weight of the ball. We had to go through a lot of R&D with the league and Wilson Sporting Goods to find the right placement of the tag in the ball so that one didn't make noise or didn't affect the integrity of ball flight or the integrity of the pass or a kick. And so that data has been collected since 2017, but even today, we see very limited sets of that information as the NFL, and we work on the technology and the data reads, and then ultimately the league will determine how much and whether or not to share that information with the general public.
Are the teams using this in practice? Are they looking at metrics while they practice that maybe the public doesn't know about?
Yeah, so we're installed in all the stadiums in the U.S. for the NFL and also the 3 stadiums in the U.K. and Azteca Stadium in Mexico City. And then we have another business channel where we sell an analogous system to the practice facilities. And we have almost a third of the league using our technology in their practice facilities to track all their practices. And why the teams track their practices is they can track the players' participation in practice. They can also track their overall workload in terms of their top speed recorded, and we also do calculations to determine overall work exertion for that player. And of course, as I mentioned, we track how much distance they travel for each rep. That's critically important when you're conditioning your team in a preseason type of environment, of course, and then of course monitoring your team's development, strength, and performance throughout an entire season. Of course, players do get injured throughout the season, so using tracking data like that is critically important when you want bringing a player back into play from an injury. And I always like to talk about this too. The tracking information helps teams monitor the performance and strength and development of players who are in their first year in the league. College players may play 12, perhaps 13 games in a season during their college years. And when they come into the NFL, they're playing a 17-week season. So as we know, the season's a long season. It's a physical game. It's a grind throughout the season. And so monitoring those players and getting them into the peak performance each and every week throughout a season is critically important as well. The ball tag in the practice environment is really interesting. The ball tag itself collects velocity and rotational information for every pass and kick. Now, I'll just use advanced analytics are a lot of fun to talk about, Bram, but sometimes it's the most elementary and fundamental benefits of technology that pay big dividends. In the cases of the quarterbacks, before a practice session officially starts, they might go out and throw the ball around, and people may not be watching that pitch count, which again could be important for a young quarterback playing along their season, if their rookie year, or for a veteran quarterback, you may want to monitor that pitch count, how many times or during a practice session. Our tag automatically collects all the throws for a quarterback. And so in the past, teams used to have either an assistant, perhaps an intern or a position coach manually recording how many throws each quarterback had during a season. Today, with our technology, the teams that use it in their practice facilities, we automatically collect that. And so those coaches and personnel can do more productive things during the practice session.
And I guess, I suppose it could monitor arm strength on some level, right? If you're kind of watching this and seeing what's happening, you could dial back a quarterback's workload off of it.
You certainly could, and I think you delve into an area where we're talking about how much is the NFL and the NFLPA feel comfortable in sharing in terms of ball metrics. We're still working on the ball tracking technology, but certainly in a practice environment, you can see all the potential benefits of monitoring. How many throws, again, as we talked about, of course, the overall arm strength, of a quarterback. But again, in interacting with scouts and coaches for, a decade and a half now, velocity really isn't the top metric or these singular metrics that coaches and strength and conditioning coaches, throwing mechanic, support staffs are looking at. It's the accuracy and the placement of the ball. We also have become the official tracking technology for the Reese Senior Bowl for the last 3 seasons, and we have an exclusive deal to be that partner for the Senior Bowl for a few more years. There we own the data in that setting in conjunction with the Senior Bowl staff itself, and we do share and publish ball velocity data and ball metrics for the kickers at the Senior Bowl. And when you think about how hard someone throws, Josh Allen from the Bills, was at the Senior Bowl a few years ago. He was recording some pretty high velocities.
Yeah.
on passes and what we typically see is a short story here, but Josh was throwing, as we all anticipated, the highest velocity passes in the first day of practice, which was a Tuesday during Senior Bowl week. What was interesting during the drills, that Josh wasn't necessarily as accurate as all the quarterbacks, as the other quarterbacks in his group that day. The next day, as we're monitoring the tracking data, his velocity was down, 3 to 5 miles per hour per pass, but his accuracy was much more effective during those practice sessions. And so you look at the information and you kind of sit back and think, well, it's the player's first day of practice. He's charged up. He really wants to show his capabilities, and he's juiced up. And perhaps the coaches, on the field are saying, hey, pull it back a little bit. Let's deliver the ball. And you can see the coaching impact from a Tuesday to a Wednesday practice. And that was one of the more exciting days we had at the Senior Bowl in the last couple of years.
I mean, that's amazing. I mean, because as you know, when he came into the league, the knock was he's not accurate, and that's going to be a problem. And maybe all it ever was he just needed to dial it back a little bit. That's amazing. Just
a little. Yeah, it really is. It really is. And now I should say, even though we, the public, don't see the ball data, the league shares the ball metrics data with the teams directly. So the coaching staffs and the personnel staffs, performance groups, and the teams do have access to that information. And of course, through the power of software and other analytics that we have, just think about how you can match, passing velocity, rotational information, and weather conditions by match it to specific pass routes where the passes are attempted and completed. You can get really excited about the type of information that you can put together, and then armed with that information, the experts on the staffs can really go to town in terms of teaching tools, reference tools to help develop the player.
You mentioned this earlier, the 40 time, especially at the combine, comes up immediately, and people use it as that guy's going to get drafted at a certain spot because of whatever his particular 40 time may be, if it's in like the 4.2 range. And then often in the past, you'll hear metrics of bench presses and things like that, and leaping ability and all that type of stuff that were the things that were put out there as this is why someone will be drafted where they are, or this is the type of player that a team will build. Through your work and the stats that you all are creating, do you get a sense that internally different metrics were or maybe are being used to build teams?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say this first. The Senior Bowl, our partnership with the Senior Bowl has been extremely valuable for us and our team partners, and I think the players have enjoyed the work we've done there as well. What I have seen is teams access our data at the Senior Bowl. So I should clarify, at the Senior Bowl, as I'm sure you're aware, and I'm sure most or all your listeners are aware, the week's worth of practice in the game itself on Saturday. And we track all the practice sessions, which the teams actually find more valuable, in terms of evaluating and assessing a player and bringing that information into a draft profile. They find the game information as well, but that Tuesday practice, that first practice, they love looking at the information and utilizing it. And what we're finding is that the teams are now taking, for the players that are at the Senior Bowl, taking that data and then merging it and associating it with 40 times to see if there's a carryover. So is there a spike of speed, or a player really recording a certain height? Does that translate over to the testing environment that they see at the combine? So I'm seeing teams, firsthand do more of that. And a couple of players that stand up, that really kind of bring that point to bear is, Montez Sweat. when he was at the Senior Bowl a couple of years ago, we look at the information each and every day, and we publish it on a large digital board at the one of the main player hotels in Mobile. And Montez scored one of the highest speeds of the week of any player when he was there. Again, we're talking about an edge rusher, a defensive lineman by definition. I don't remember the exact number, but it was some in the area of 19 and a half to almost 20 miles per hour speed. And he recorded that speed. Of course, he's not running. His speed wasn't recorded during a special teams drill where he's sprinting down the field. This was during drill where he's working in a 10 to 15, yard space. So it really suggests his explosiveness. Now, of course, the professional scouts and personnel evaluators understood that a player like Montez was extremely explosive in college. But then you get the information at the Senior Bowl. Go, okay, well that's interesting. He would have placed ninth amongst the 17 DBs that were at Senior Bowl that way. He would have been ninth fastest of the DBs with that top speed that he carried, and he was in the top 3 of running backs recorded in speed. So you just again to underscore the athleticism, and then of course he ran a really excellent 40 at Indianapolis as well. And so that was one of my, in the years of being down, even previous to my time at Zebra, I was with stats. And so I spent a lot of time in Mobile the last decade. And that was one of the more incredible things that we'd seen. Also, a Washington player, Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin in 2019, he scored the fastest top speed of any player at the 2019 Senior Bowl at 22.17 miles an hour. And then, of course, Terry, we saw that translate into his skills at Indianapolis. And, of course, we're seeing that capability that Terry brings to bear in his speed, utilizing his speed to not only get open and be an effective receiver, but create, extend plays of yards after catch. In fact, Terry McLaurin has the 10th. Right now, he's 10th in the league in yards after catch above expectation. So the data that we collect in terms of when a player catches a ball, how many defenders are around them, how fast are they moving at the time of the reception, are they running in stride, all that information is analyzed, and then Terry is 10th in the league, extending plays at least 6.5 yards above expectation during the season. So that I think you see teams become much more comfortable taking metrics of a combine, marrying it with some of the tracking data, and then bringing that into their scouting assessment.
So do you ever watch the draft and go, why aren't they picking that guy?
Well, I definitely know enough to leave it to the experts when it comes to selecting
right.
players. There's a lot, as we can all appreciate. There's a lot that goes into that. I think I actually watch. I like to see. I watch the combine much differently than I ever did, particularly for those players that we're tracking at the Senior Bowl. Right, so we really look forward. We go in there, and our group will say, we'll even have internal meetings and just say, how do we think these guys are going to do? Have informal conversations, and we have seen over the last 3 seasons a relatively reliable correlation to what we saw and what happened in Mobile, and did it translate for those players that do get invited to the combine as well. And then, of course, if you see some of these players show up at at the draft and get excited for them, and you like to think that somewhere, somehow, in that draft pick would a piece of the information, that just a little ingredient that Zebra may have provided that gives us a lot of pride.
All right, last thing for you as we head into the future. What kind of stats do you think can you share that you think are going to be coming down the road from Zebra Technologies that NFL fans will be seeing in 2021 and beyond?
Yeah, so I think we'll go right to the ball metrics. Right, Bram? I think seeing some level of the ball metrics would make me excited. I think all of us at Zebra and all of us as fans, and I think seeing ball metrics at some version, included in some of the publicly distributed information would be exciting. And we may see that. I don't have any inside information on that, and I don't know, the NFLPA's current stance. I leave that up to them. We're the service provider for the league, and so that's up to them. But we'd love to see those ball metrics published on a broader scale in the future. I think for me too, being a former, marginal college football player and a longtime fan for my whole life, what I'd like to see is, let's take the miles per hour, for instance, Graham, and then providing more game context around the miles per hour. So can through the use of mathematics, right? Can we take miles per hour as a number for a player during a play, and then say what was the speed of a player, of a linebacker, from the moment they recognize during a play, let's call it a play action pass play, when they take a step towards the fake handoff and they have to recover and fall back into coverage. Can we apply the change of direction and the explosiveness, the miles, the top speed for that player in that short window when they change direction and go back into their primary coverage responsibility? Or a scenario like a linebacker, when they recognize when it's a run play and you can track out where the linebacker is reading, and then from the moment of the handoff, because we have a tag in the ball, a tag in the running back, a tag in the quarterback, a tag in the linebacker, how fast does that linebacker recognize run and then get to the point of attack when they make a tackle or miss tackle or contribute to that? So I like to describe it as putting more game situation context around our speed and distance metrics and create a setting for us to really say that player has great game speed. Okay, game speed, what does that mean? Put it in game context and game scenarios. I think also the explosiveness of a running back, the last example I'll make, running back, when they have explosive runs of 10 plus yards or 15 plus yards, what's their acceleration rate into the line of scrimmage? And once they get to that line of scrimmage, what is the differentiation, if there is any, of acceleration into the second and third level to extend plays? I think that would, again, bring a lot of excitement for us as fans and the media as well. But I also think, in terms of allowing coaches and personnel staff to, again, evaluate players in the way they view things, how they look at information, how they try to judge players' capabilities and competencies. I think that is something that certainly can be done today through software and analytics. I think we'll see that over the next few years.
I think you are toggling. I think you know that right on the proprietary stuff too. I wonder if the NFL and the PA are going to be all right with disseminating that linebacker wasn't where he was supposed to be. I wonder if they'll let that actually get out there.
Yeah, I wonder that too, and I understand if they don't. But I think selfishly, again, I get to speak, from a media perspective. I interact from a media perspective, but I also interact with the teams themselves. So when I'm working with the coaching staff and trying to create, more value and service opportunity for them, perhaps we don't see it as fans, but we see some version of that, leak out. But, primarily we provide that to the teams themselves so they can do their job better. But I will say this, Bram, if you go to the Next Gen Stats site, there's a category on of leader list called longest tackles. And if you look at that longest tackles list, it does start to suggest, how far down a field a player will travel, to go stop a play. And of course, DK Metcalf's tackle of Buda Baker from behind is on there as one of the longest tackles of the season. But, I'm totally honored where the NFL and the NFLPA would have a perspective on this, and that's great. But I think over time we see more comfort, and there's probably some version of the scenarios we discussed that could be shared that aren't overly disclosing, and maybe it's just a limited set. But again, I hope to see that, and I would anticipate we see some version of it in a few years.
Yeah, and I think I echo the sentiments of all broadcasters. More. We'll take all of it. And with the fans, I think what you've learned too is we want it too. Everybody wants it. So I could see where the vice grip loosens with you guys, and they see the benefit of it.
Yeah, I think so. As you mentioned that too, I think in that same idea, coaches and personnel staff like to understand a player's explosive capabilities. So what does they get off on a 10-yard area space, right? So is there ways, or maybe if it's just a subset of games, maybe it's just a playoff game. Maybe that's the happy medium we find that shows us some of this information. But the thing is, the tantalizing thing is the technology's there. It's capable of doing that again. But yeah, the pragmatism, I do say this all the time. It's really important. Technology is really exciting. New information is really exciting. We have to honor the foundation, and the history of these sports and these leagues. And they've done a good job for over 100 years, and they know what they're doing. And I'm excited that they partnered with us at Zebra. And look, I don't know that I would have guessed where we are today when we started this thing 7 years ago. So, I trust their judgment.
I mean, what's actually like very encouraging is you sound like you're still a fan of the game, because I worry about a day where I know too much that I don't enjoy the game the same way. And I can only imagine that you watch these games and you almost know too much about what's going on in front of you.
Well, it's an interesting point. It's a good point. I think part of, my friends, they knew what kind of a sports, fan I was. I love all sports, and it was my life as a kid, admittedly. And I think people wonder, is too much information, does it ruin the sport, or working take a bit of the bloom off the rose because you see it because of the inner workings? Quite honestly, Bram, the closer I get to it, the more access to this information, I definitely look at the game through a different, but there's more of that of an appreciation. We know these, but I would have loved the information. As a matter of fact, I was talking with Barry Sanders at the Super Bowl in Miami this year, and he's like, "Gosh, I would have loved to have this tracking information on these when I was running." You can imagine the change of direction, explosive information from someone like Barry Sanders or Eric Dickerson, some of the game's great players, and so I think that just underscores that it brings you closer to the game. It really does give us an appreciation for the true athleticism of these players. The fidelity of the data doesn't take the fun out of it. It brings a new dimension to it. And so that's why I'm excited about it, and I continue to be.
Yeah, go back, get the video of Barry Sanders, show why he was special. I think there's value in that too. I think you guys could do that.
Well, that's something on the old idea board here in the office, Bram, and I have an autographed comment of one of my favorite players of all time, but I'll mention one more player. How about Bo Jackson? Would have been very interesting to see some of Bo Jackson's accelerations.
Yeah,
when he was running. I'm looking at it in Seattle when he had the big Monday Night Football game, against the Seahawks years and years ago. But iconic moments in NFL football. But perhaps there's a day that we can retroactively leverage some of the game video and generate some speed metrics, and that would give us all something really new to talk about.
It's all really cool. John Pollard is the head of sports at Zebra Technologies, which is the company behind the NFL's Next Gen Stats. Thank you so much, John, for spending so much time with us.
Graham, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the conversation. Enjoyed it very much.
On the next Future Sport podcast, wearables may revolutionize more than just athletic metrics.
Obviously, when you have a global pandemic in the form of a virus, and that virus self-selects in part by the level of your immune system and other risk factors about your body, it just makes the population at large wonder, am I healthy enough? And I think the other thing that's amazing about COVID-19 and scary about COVID-19 is you can literally have the virus but not feel any.
That's Will Ahmed, CEO of Whoop, who will discuss how the pandemic has opened the eyes of many to preventative health care. That will do it for this episode. As always, the future is now. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein. The Future Sport Podcast is brought to you by 3 Advance, developers of sports tech apps that are AI-powered and UX-focused. So if you're looking to create some apps for your startup or your sports biz calls for some artificial or business intelligence, you should check out 3 Advance. They're incredible. Go to 3advance.com. That's the number 3advance.com.